Hi, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka the Rig Doctor, and today I'm giving you my buyer's guide to finding the right MIDI programmable switcher for you. Before we talk about switchers, I think it's important to identify the three most common customers that might be interested in buying a programmable switcher. Now, full disclosure, I do not make a programmable switcher, so all of the recommendations that I make today are based on my experience in working with other customers and clients that utilize these type of switchers and my experience using and programming these switchers and making my best recommendations from there. I haven't been paid by any of these companies to say anything about these products. This is simply my opinion, so take it for what it is as somebody who has built a lot of rigs, utilized these switchers, and is giving you my best advice to find the one that best meets your needs in context. So the three most common archetypes of people that are buying switchers, I think, fall into three different categories. Person one is typically somebody who's new to switchers, new to MIDI. Maybe doesn't have a lot of pedals and devices that utilize MIDI, but they want to start experimenting and maybe want to be able to bring in multiple effects by hitting one foot switch. Customer number two is somebody that maybe is a little bit more intermediate. Maybe they've already utilized some MIDI pedals, but maybe they haven't utilized a programmable switcher yet. They're willing to put in the time, they're willing to dig into a manual a little bit, don't want something too complicated, but want to be able to get the most out of their MIDI effects and use a combination of MIDI programmable effects and traditional analog or just standard effects that don't have any MIDI control. And then customer number three. This is our high-tech guru, the guy that's willing to spend loads of hours in the manual, wants to do all the programming, is programming entire set lists and songs inside of their programmable MIDI controller, and they're doing everything possible to get the most out of this thing, really utilizing every possible thing inside of it, switching orders, series parallel, really high-tech stuff. This is person number three. Also, at the end of this, I'm gonna go through and give you what my personal favorite pick is, what I think the best budget version is, and what I think is the most bang for the buck. So stay tuned so you can get those recommendations at the end. So let's talk about the customer number one, kind of the prototypical newbie to MIDI, the guy that doesn't understand a whole lot about it, but wants to get into it, wants to have something easy that's a good kind of gateway for maybe them learning more, experimenting more, and getting into some more hardcore switchers. This person I have two switcher recommendations for. The first one is the Electro-Harmonic Super Switcher, and this is a great buy at only $3.99. It offers lots of different options for that price point, has a programmable boost, offers stereo accessibility from the output section, and you have a few stereo loops in there as well. For $400, you cannot go wrong with this. A lot of the programming on this as well can all be done right from the front of the unit itself. It doesn't need to plug into a computer in order for you to start programming and making MIDI changes right away, which is a huge plus if you're somebody that's new to this stuff. The EHX Super Switcher allows for you to have 8 loops. It has a simple digital display, and it has input and output buffers. 2 meg on the input, which is a little higher than what I would normally like to see. Usually 1 meg is more ideal, and 470 on the output, which is not terrible, but is kind of maybe somewhere between what I would ordinarily recommend, which is at 100 ohms, and what most pedals and devices are, which is around 1K. So it's kind of in between those 2 points. And then if you do use the boost on the output, then it ups that to 1K. So a little less line driving capability if you're using the boosted outputs of the EHX Super Switcher. It has 2 control outs as well, so you can use that to do amp changes and things like that. And it has 128 presets available inside of this actual unit. So 128 patches that you can program, has plenty of room for adding, and can be a great asset to somebody who's getting into this new. Now, another one that I think falls into this category, which is more expensive but is also very easy to use, is the Gigrig G2 and G3. Now, I did a video about this exact same topic a few years ago, and many of you asked why I didn't include the G2. And I've actually had a chance to work with it a lot more through my good friend Dani Rabin at Marbin. And we actually did a rig rundown with our friends over at Sweetwater with What's on Your Pedalboard with Don Carr, where I got to rebuild his rig using the G2. And I would say, although there are some shortcomings of it, the ease of use I think is by far the easiest one that I found out there, where you do not need to be technical at all and you can pretty much be up and running in minutes with this thing. And so I was really impressed by how easy it was to get this thing going. The MIDI programmable aspect of it is really pretty fantastic. And I think although there are some shortcomings in the buffers and disagreeing with Dan on some of the impedances that he chose, I think that if you're somebody that's new and wants something that's really rock solid, well built, and easy to use, this is certainly one to pick from. And they also have their new G3, which I haven't seen yet in the United States, but is going to be here at some point soon. I hopefully will see one this year. Maybe I can get Dan to send me one so I can really give it a full evaluation. But this looks to even improve upon what the G2 is doing. So I would definitely say if the G2 is any indication of how the G3 will function, I think it's certainly something that's easy to use, has lots of options. By contrast to the Super Switcher, the G2 has 10 loops and the G3 has 12 loops. The G2 doesn't have a digital display, but the G3 has a beautiful LED digital display that looks like it's going to be really easy to use and also very visible. You can change loop order on both of these, and I think on the G2 there's some exclusions for the stereo loops, but by and large most of those loops can all be rearranged in whatever order you want by way of their matrix. You have expression pedal control and remote switching, over 2,000 presets, and on the new G3, it's Bluetooth compatible, which is another really cool thing, so you can do programming without having, again, to connect it to a computer. So those are the two that I would say are the best for the beginner, the person that wants to get up and running in minutes and doesn't have to have a background in tech work and in doing all sorts of computer programming in order to get these things running. They can pretty much be programmed right on their face very easily and sound great, are well built. Those are my two recommendations for somebody who's just getting into programmable switchers and wants something really great. Now I want to talk about customer number two. This is a person that's not necessarily interested in the easiest thing to use, is willing to put in a little time learning MIDI, but is not willing to go full bore and program entire set lists and song lists onto their MIDI programmable switcher. I have two great switchers for this person. The first one is the Boss ES8 and ES5. These are the two Boss switchers. Now these are a little bit more expensive than the EHX Super Switcher, but a little less expensive than the G2, which we talked about for kind of more that entry-level person that's interested in an easy-to-use switcher like with the G2 and the Super Switcher. I really like the Boss for several reasons. First of all, it offers an incredible amount of functions for the price that it is. It's pretty incredible for the price that for an ES8, you can get a lot of the same functions of things like the G2. You have multiple stereo loops, you have a parallel and serial option, has a great digital display, input and output buffers that are all programmable. Also, you have 800 presets, so a few fewer, but I think when you start getting into those multiple hundred presets, do you really need all of those? Most people don't. Also, the other benefit of this is it has that same matrix where you can change the order of any of the effects that are wired into it, except for the ones that are in the stereo loops. So all in all, this is a really great one. It does allow you some ability to go in and program it through the computer, but you can also do a lot of it on its face in the digital display there and with the buttons that are there. I think pretty easy to use, not quite as easy as the G2, but a little less expensive, and I think it does offer you a lot more programmability options. You have a little bit more control with the MIDI. These are all things that I think are really important if you want to be able to send and receive MIDI messages. It allows you to do all that inside of the ES8, and again, with 800 patches, not a whole lot you can't do with that. I think that this is a great buy for somebody who wants to go a little deeper, wants a little bit more programmability with MIDI, and I think it's a really excellent unit, especially at its price point. I think it does a good bang for your buck on that one. The other one that I want to talk about that's in this category for customer number two, kind of the intermediate type customer that is willing to put in a little time, is Disaster Area. And Disaster Area has some really great switchers. They have a few different ones available, and the one that I really want to focus on is their 8-loop one. And I think it's absolutely incredible how inexpensive they're able to get this thing. At $350, it's a great buy, offers you a lot of the same MIDI programmability as a lot of the other switchers, and it's very compact. It can fit on almost any pedal board practically. It is so small. Now the jacks are pretty tight, and you're definitely going to have to use lower profile straight plugs like something like the SP4 or something like that from Square Plugs that I would ordinarily use, you're only going to be able to fit that on the back because of how tight those jacks are. But I think it is well worth it in the space savings that it gives you overall. This has 8 loops, allows you to have a selectable input buffer. I don't believe that there's an output buffer on that from the literature that I've seen. There is no spec, however, specified as to what the actual impedance is of that buffer, so I can't comment on the quality of that. It has 2 TRS control loops, 128 presets, and again is the most compact of any of the switchers that we're talking about and reviewing for you today. I think it could be a great buy for somebody that wants to, again, get a little bit more complicated with MIDI, only needs 8 loops, 128 patches or presets. This is something that is going to give you the most space savings, adds a lot of different options that some of the other switchers don't. It doesn't have that matrix where you can reroute the order from what it shows in their literature, but again, the cost is so low at $350. It's a pretty low price for entry into this and gives you a lot of that firepower of some of the more expensive $1,000 plus switchers that are out there. Now this brings us to customer 3, the person that is wanting to go all out with MIDI, has lots of MIDI programmable devices, is very comfortable with MIDI, and really wants to be able to get the most bang for their buck, programming their entire set list, having nice digital displays where they can see readouts of everything, exactly where they are, has presets for every single possible conceivable thing, scenes and pages and all sorts of stuff. I have a couple of different switchers for that person. The EFX5 is a great switcher, especially for the money. It competes with some of the best ones on the market and really is compact, is well built, and has excellent buffers in it that are the exact spec that I recommend. And although the manual dictates that it's a 2.2 meg input impedance, it's actually been modified back to 1 meg, and the output impedance is 100 ohms. So right exactly what you'd want for an ideal buffer, and those are also programmable. There's isolated outs on this, which is a really big thing if you're going to be running a stereo or a split mono system. You want to have that galvanic isolation on the output. That's a really big thing. Equally, this has a great computer editor software, which I think is fairly easy to use comparatively to the other ones that are out there. You can go in and make most of the changes that you want, setting up your presets, your MIDI commands, all the PC changes, all that stuff can be done through their software, which you connect your Musicom Lab device to, and then you can make the changes there. But you can also make the changes on the actual unit itself using their hardware and doing it externally. Not quite as easy. I think it's really best to do it on a computer, but you do have the option of doing either. The EFX5 is under $1,000, has 9 loops, 2 of them are stereo, has a nice digital display, again, 2 buffers available on the input and output of this unit. You can change the loop order so it utilizes a similar style matrix to the Boss and the G2. It has expression controls and function controls, and it has 361 presets. Now another one that I also really like for this type of customer that really wants to program everything is the RJM PBC10 and PBC6X. Both of these are excellent switchers. They all offer high quality input and output buffers. On the PBC10, it has a galvanically isolated output by way of a transformer, so you get all that benefit like you did in the Musicom Lab if you wanted to run stereo or you wanted to run split amplifiers. And on the PBC6, it offers all those matrix switching options where you can move anything into any order. And even though it only has 6 published loops with a 7th loop for a volume pedal insert, you can also use any of the stereo loops in order to add additional loops. So any stereo loop can become 2 different loops, which gives you a possibility of having 11 loops, whereas the PBC10 has 10 loops plus a volume pedal loop. So it gives you almost ostensibly the exact same number of possible loops, even though on the PBC6X, you only have those 6 individual switches for dedicated loops. Of course, you can program some of the other switches to do different things to give you a few extra options. But both of these are absolutely fantastic. Ron and Sherry have done a really killer job in outfitting their software that you can plug in the RJM units into. You can do all of your programming. You can arrange your set list. You can arrange your songs. You can make everything very specific, exactly the way that you want it. And if there's something that you don't understand, you can always email them. They're very responsive to their customers, have great customer service, and I have yet to not get an email back from them with under a few hours responding to any questions that I might have, or any kind of wild harebrained idea that I might have that I want to see if the PBC will do, it almost always can do it, and I always get a very thoughtful and responsive answer from them. So I highly recommend this one for anybody that wants to go crazy with MIDI and really wants to be able to do anything under the sun. Just to name a few of the specs, again, the PBC6 can do up to 11 loops if you're utilizing those stereo loops, whereas the RJM PBC10 has 10 loops. Has a beautiful digital display, big, very easy to see. I think it's one of the best interfaces out there from a guitar player standpoint, where everything is easy to see. The way that it's set up is very intuitive in my opinion. It has 768 total presets, has expression pedal and also external switching so that you can do any of your amp switching by way of the RJM units. And the buffer is around 500K on the input, which is a little lower. There is a mod that I've done where you can raise it up to 1 meg, and then the output is right around 100 ohms. So roughly what I would recommend, maybe a little bit lower on the input impedance, but that is something that can be fixed and modified. If you're careful or you ask Ron, maybe that's something they can do for you before they ship you the unit. You'll have to ask them about that one, but I've made that change myself and it's pretty easy to do. It's just a matter of swapping a couple components. And the other benefit is that it has an integrated tuner, so that's just one less thing that you would need on your pedal board. The one inside the RJM is actually quite excellent. So those are switchers for 3 common customer types. Really the person that's a beginner, the intermediate, and the advanced, and you have a couple of recommendations at 2 different price points within each of those. But now I want to give you my picks, and I want to go through 3 different categories. One is the best budget. The second one is the most bang for your buck, and the third is my personal pick, the one that I would actually use. So let's start with the person that is just budget motivated. I don't think that there's any way that you can get around not going for the EHX Super Switcher or for the disaster area. The disaster area is the cheapest one out there, is very sophisticated. The guys that are running disaster area are some of the best engineers of any pedal manufacturers in the business. They have really smart ideas, and I think that they did a great job of creating something compact, small, and inexpensive that's really usable for guitar players. Equally, although a little bit bigger, I think that the Super Switcher is great. The fact that it offers stereo is a real godsend, especially at the price that it is. The number of loops that it allows you to have. It's a really great budget switcher as well. It has the boosts on the output. Again, the stereo use is really compelling. And the fact that you can do most of the programming right from the front of it makes it really easy. You don't have to hook it up to a computer. You can do everything that you need. Allows you to connect MIDI to it as well. I think that there's a lot of great assets to both of these, just depending on what it is that you need. For bang for your buck, I think it's without question that the Boss is the best one out there. Whether it's the ES5 if you only need 5 loops or the ES8, these do a lot of the things that the really expensive $1,200 to $1,500 switchers do, in addition to any of the ones that are below it in price point. You have stereo options, you have MIDI in and MIDI out, you have expression controls, you have control options to do amp switching. You have all sorts of different options in terms of the matrices where you can switch the order of any of the pedals. It can do parallel or series. And for under $800, I think it's certainly a great buy that allows you to really do everything that you could possibly need. It's got about one of the most easy to use user interfaces on the ES8 and the ES5. Easy programming, really easy to get around on this thing. I highly recommend this as having the most bang for your buck, the most features for what you're spending money on. Now lastly, it's my pick, my favorite switcher. And I'm kind of torn on this because there's 2 that I really like. I would say for the smaller switcher, the PBC6X is by far the best one in my opinion. It's small, offers a tremendous amount of firepower, and even on my own personal wet rig that I'm building right now, I'm using a PBC6X because I think that it's one of the best ones out there. It really sounds great. Modified that buffer to my specs so I get that 1 meg input impedance, and everything else about it is absolutely to love. It is a really great unit, expensive, but really delivers on what it needs to do. Great digital display, great programmability. The software for the computer is pretty easy to work with as far as that's concerned, so I really love that one. And if I wanted to go a little bit bigger, I think I gotta go Musicom Lab. Their software is a little less easy to use than the RJM, but I think the option of having that isolated output is really huge for going stereo. That's really helpful, and the fact that you can change order with that same matrix is really helpful. The RJM equivalent doesn't allow you to change the order and positioning of the effects, and that is something that can be really handy if you do want to start auditioning different pedals in different places. I really love that option, and I love pairing it with the parallelizer, which is another item that Musicom Lab makes, where I can run my wet effects in parallel with a line level signal hitting them, so I can run a wet, dry, wet there, and it's all easily compatible with MIDI, and I can program all that within the actual Musicom Lab EFX5. It's just a really, really great unit. I love it to death, and I think both of these are excellent units. In fact, everything that we talked about today could be great depending on your circumstance and your particular context, but I really wanted to outline kind of the most common customers we see, how we would pair different types of switchers for you, and then giving you kind of all the information. Again, I haven't been paid by any of these people. I haven't been given any free product from any of these people. I'm genuinely just telling you what my experience is having used these and where I think they might align best with you as the customer, as sort of a buyer's guide to where you might want to jump into some of these different switchers depending on what your actual context is. If you like what you saw today, I highly recommend that you do the things. You give us a thumbs up and like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more about what we're doing. Hit the bell icon so you can stay up to date with all the latest and greatest stuff that we're doing. If you want to support us further in this channel, I highly recommend that you head over to the Vertex Effects website. You can buy a pedal from us, or head over to therigdr.com. We have all of our pedalboard supplies for sale there, from Velcro, tie-down mounts, zip ties, custom-made patch cables, TRS cables, MIDI cables, all the stuff that you're gonna need to build your rig. And we also offer one-on-one consulting there that you can select from, so you can get one-on-one time with me to help you build your rig of your dreams. So go there, check that out. That's all really helpful to us and the channel. And until next time, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka The Rig Doctor. See you later.